The realm of sorcery is filled with mythological, historical, and literary creatures and relics based on some of the most important works in human history. One part of this equation are the writings of Howard Philip Lovecraft, who especially with his Cthulhu mythos defined the genre and hence became known as the father of cosmic horror. There are several allusions and direct correlations to Lovecraft's many stories soon throughout the alpha and beta set, which I want to discover with you throughout the course of this video.
Welcome sorcerers, I'm your humble host Yunus and you're watching Contested Cards. In today's episode we'll explore the many connections sorcery's first sets make to the fantastical works of H.P. Lovecraft and the stories behind the cards we love. Two quick notes before we go. The names in Lovecraft's works are sometimes downright meant to be unpronounceable, so please forgive any mistakes on my part. And second, keep in mind that all the art are the artist's interpretations and are not beholden to accurately depict anything based on our preconceived notions. With that out of the way, let us venture into the dark depths of a twisted mind and how his influences stretch all the way to the contested realm.
The first and only explicit mention of Lovecraft we get is on Spectral Stalker, a 2-power, 2-cost air minion with Void Walk. Its flavor text quotes the opening of the Call of Cthulhu. In full, the passage reads, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. And it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little. But someday the piecing together of disassociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age." This quote perfectly encapsulates not only the mood of Lovecraft's tales, but also their major themes. The horror lies within the indescribable, the intangible, the pure shattering of humankind's understanding about the world, and the unknown nature of the dark void surrounding it. The Call of Cthulhu, published in February 1928, might be Lovecraft's most vital work, as it introduced us to the chief Great Old One, Cthulhu himself. The Great Old Ones are an ancient alien species of eldritch horrors that have descended from the stars and since been worshipped by deranged cultists all over the world. These deities were once ruling Earth, but since have fallen into a deep slumber, imprisoned, dead, only to be reborn when the stars are right. In the case of Cthulhu, deep beneath the sea, locked away in a city called R'lyeh. This is also where he was found by the fishermen who came about the green slimy rocks protruding out of the ocean after a severe storm had unearthed them. The non-Euclidean nature of its architecture is what had caught their interest. And before realizing what they were doing by setting foot on this accursed rock, they had already awoken the evil deep within the city's core. Apart from Cthulhu and his numerous offspring, there are many more horrors being classified as Great Old Ones, like Yig, Father of Serpents, Okranos, who resides in Kadath, and even the Color we'll talk about later. Cthulhu is not considered a god among the other starspawn, but a great priest. His true nature and intentions are unknown. Cthulhu cultists believe his return will herald shouting and killing and reveling in joy, and that Cthulhu will teach them new ways to do so. Apart from the Great Old Ones, there are also the Outer Gods, Great Ones, and Elder Gods, who make appearances all throughout Lovecraft's works. But I'll leave it at that. During his lifetime, as well as after Lovecraft's passing in 1937, the Cthulhu mythos was expanded by many authors in countless stories, adding on to the ever-growing cosmos and lore of Lovecraft's creation. Sorcery does have its own Great Old One, titled exactly that. A unique monster that drowns the cosmos. And like Cthulhu, this deity emerges from the deep, watery depths. While the title and theme are clearly a reference to Lovecraft, the Great Old One depicted is not in line with his descriptions of our tentacle overlord and more a free interpretation on the artist's side. Visually, it does pull a lot from another mythological creature called the Luska. a weird hybrid being from Caribbean folklore being the mixture of a shark and an octopus. But there's a card way more in line with how we would expect Cthulhu to look like, the Diluvian Kraken, the other gigantic water horror sorcery currently has on offer. One thing is for sure, Dan Seagrave couldn't have been named better. From the deep, dark depths of aquatic alien life, let us push on to hazy adventures while dreaming and talk about Lovecraft's dream cycle of stories. These were all created before his conception of Cthulhu, though there are already several mentions of the gods present. The dream cycle entails a collection of stories all centered on strange dreams, taking place in the Dreamlands, an alternate dimension only accessible while in deep sleep. The first story in the dream cycle, Polaris, written in 1918, is where we get the first mention of the Pnakotic manuscripts. The story revolves around an unnamed narrator becoming infatuated with the North Star, believing it started to mockingly wink at him. In a night of aurora above his house, the protagonist is starting to have dreams of a marble city between two peaks. With Polaris still above him, watching his every move, the narrator begins to revisit the city in his dreams every night. While at first he's only a silent observer, unable to interact with people, he soon becomes involved with this marvelous city and its inhabitants. Later, becoming aware of a brewing conflict with a neighboring people called the MYTHOS, a conflict on the verge of escalation. The protagonist is given the role to station the watchtower to be on the lookout for incoming attacks. But as he arrives on top of the tower, a rhyme pops into his head. And as he tries to decipher it, he falls asleep and wakes from the dream, failing the city. Afterwards, he wasn't able to visit the city anymore and started questioning his own reality, unsure if he was awake or still dreaming. The Pnakotic manuscripts are only mentioned very briefly while the narrator is describing his newfound knowledge and how he acquired it. According to him, the scripts contain the law of skies. Later on in the cycle, this is further defined as the knowledge of the gods. Beyond Polaris, the Pnakotic manuscripts continue to make appearances in most of the dream cycle stories, such as the other gods and our next topic of discussion, the dream quest of unknown Kadath. The card I'm obviously building up to here is the Magic Spell Dream Quest, which can be interpreted as a direct reference to this story or the dream cycle in general. In this beautiful artwork by Elvira Shakirova, we see a woman asleep on top of what looks to be some kind of grimoire, as a vile-looking hand is reaching out from behind her. I hope she's dreaming of cats. As the last entry in Lovecraft's dream cycle, the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath is not only one of the longest stories in the cycle, but also in all of Lovecraft's works. The novel sees our, at this point, seasoned dream traveler, Randolph Carter, struggling to enter a magnificent city in his dreams. Sounds somewhat familiar, and those aren't the only two stories about dream cities. But this is not Olothe, the city from Polaris. 3 times Carter tries, but is denied, unable to enter. Feeling entitled to see this secret city, he seeks to travel to the Dreamlands and face the gods at their castle in Kadath to demand entry. Quickly, he realizes that nobody really knows where Kadath is. So, he sets out on his quest that takes him through trials and tribulations, being captured several times, but luckily rescued by different companions, most important of all, the cats. It's up to him to puzzle together all the information he receives and find the whereabouts of Kadath. Once he reaches Castle Kadath though, he soon finds out that the gods have left and settled in the city of his dreams. There he encounters Nyarlathotep, one of the outer gods, who informs him that the city Carter has been dreaming about is just a mirrored version of his own hometown, and that the paradise he seeks stems from his own childhood memories. Carter, still not satisfied with the answer he received, stays firm in his demands. Nyarlathotep tricks him by offering passage to the city, which Carter just realizes in time to wake himself up and escape the trap. Over the course of Carter's quest to find Kadath, we get a full description of the Dreamlands. There are the heavens, the underworld, the moon along with the rest of our stars and planets, which may be accessed by traveling the sea or by cat, and of course, the surface, which is divided into 4 regions. The west, encompassing locations such as the jungle city of Lanith, the land of Nar, and the town of Ulthar, where no man may kill a cat.
Seriously, big cat guy, this Lovecraft fellow. But do yourself a favor and don't Google his cat's name.
The south is home to the Isle of Orion as well as the Fantastic Realms. In the east, the city of Celephaeus resides next to the dangerous Forbidden Lands. But it's in the north where we'll find our next stop. Because the north is home to the plateau of Lang and its man-eating spiders, and not to forget, the Men of Lang. Men of Lang is another direct point of reference, and even the art resembles how Carter describes them. Quote, "They leaped as though they had hooves instead of feet, and seemed to wear a sort of wig or headpiece with small horns. And of other clothing they had none, but most of them were quite furry. Behind they had dwarfish tails, and when they glanced upward, he saw the excessive width of their mouths. Then he knew what they were, and that they did not wear any wigs or headpieces after all. Beyond their knack for slavery and human flesh, some are also surprisingly competent merchants, selling rubies at the port of Dinathlin to further the moon mine production. Dreams, people. Anything might happen." From dreams to nightmares, we arrive at the fringes of reality on our very doorstep. The Color Out of Space is based on a short story by the same name. Like with other Lovecraft stories, it is relayed to us via an unnamed narrator, investigating events that took place way before his time. Most of the information he receives comes from an allegedly crazy man named Ami Pierce. He tells the story of the Gardner family, consisting of husband Nahum, his wife and their 3 sons, living by themselves in the woods in the city of Arkham. Everything takes place over the span of a year. It all began with the meteorite. On one particularly strange night, a meteorite fell from the sky and impacted right next to the gardener's well. The news of this incident spread quickly across town, and on the following morning Nahum Gardner and his wife invited 3 professors from the closest university to examine the thing. Upon arriving, they were surprised, as it had already shrunken in size since its impact the night before. They took a small sample and conducted several tests that only posed more questions. This substance had the strangest of properties. It was a magnetic metal, no doubt, but malleable like plastic. It gave off a faint glow in the dark and seemed to endlessly exude heat, aside from when being put into strong acids. The sample they took had completely vanished by the next day, so they set out again to get a larger piece for studying. This time, they dug deeper. After prying away smaller pieces, quote, they had uncovered what seemed to be the side of a large colored globule embedded in the substance. The color, which resembled some of the bands in the meteor's strange spectrum, was almost impossible to describe, and it was only by analogy that they called it color at all. That night, a big thunderstorm happened, and through what weird properties it seemed to have, it attracted lightning. Lightning impacted the rock, not once, not twice, but 6 times in short succession. On the morning after, the mass had resolved and the clump of material was gone. This is where the real terror began. Slowly, over the course of months, things started to change. In the winter, they noticed that the animals' footprints were getting strange and unnatural. The plants started to glow phosphorescently and resemble those strange colors, until they ultimately became grey and brittle. His wife was the first to go crazy. After continued decline in her sanity, Nahum was forced to shut her in the attic. More time passed as her terrible screams filled the air. Next was one of his sons, who went equally mad and had to be locked away too. It was clear the water from the well was no good anymore, but still they kept on consuming it. Nahum knew that things weren't right, but still he could not do anything about it, as if an invisible force was keeping him and his family from escaping, completely draining them of their will to live. His locked away son was the first to die. Soon after, his second son went missing while going out for water to the well. When we last see the gardeners, weeks later, their third son was also gone. When asked by Amy Pierce, Nahum says he lives in a well now. At this point, madness had taken him. And when Pierce ascended the stairs to the attic where Nahum's wife had been held, he encountered an unspeakable abomination too horrid to describe. Nahum had at this point become horribly deformed himself and uttered in his last moments of clarity that the color is responsible for everything before dying on the spot. When Pierce returned to the house soon after in company of several men to examine what happened, they became witness to it. As they were in the house, Pierce's horse started to whinny terribly. The trees were convulsing, the blands glowing. The color started to pour from the well and in an earth-shaking instant shot up into the sky and vanished. Pierce was the only one to witness a left-behind part of the color trying to ascend as well, but ultimately failing and returning to the well, where it likely still resides. Finally, let's look at an external addition to the Cthulhu mythos, The Hounds of Tindalos by author Frank Belknap Long. Making their debut in the short story by the same name and later mentioned by Lovecraft himself in The Whisperer in Darkness. Now, Hounds of Tindalos does sound a lot like Hounds of Ondoros if you ask me. They are described as dimension-phasing hounds with the ability to materialize at any point in space and time to feed upon their prey. As they are about to take shape, the first thing you'll see will be smoke pouring out from a corner before their heads emerge. Even the art by Francesca Barrett resembles a few other common interpretations of their likeness. While their name evokes a physical appearance akin to dogs, neither Long nor Lovecraft ever go so far as to outright detail them, as they are said to be too foul to be ever described. But we know they enter through angles, with extreme angles above 120 degrees being the best. They have tongues used to drain their victims' body fluids, and are exuding some kind of blue ichor, which again is somewhat in line with the art used in sorcery. Mechanically, with their ability to exist in every plane, they do tie in nicely with how we would expect these vile creatures to work in game. Beyond all these somewhat obvious references and allusions, there are a few other cards that could be interpreted to fit within Lovecraft's world. There are several great old ones and their spawn being described as slimy or squirming masses, so you could make the connection to squirming mass. And I'm sure you'll find a maelstrom somewhere in there. And I'll leave you with my personal biggest reach of all. We do not know how or why the city of R'lyeh sank beneath the sea, but one could say it suffered an Atlantean fate.
And this has been it. I hope you enjoyed the trip. And who knows, maybe you got a new perspective on some sorcery cards. There still might be connections to be made that I missed. If so, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, thank you for watching, and I see you guys next time.